Hey listeners, I'm Hallie.
And I'm Brittany.
And thank you for tuning back into the Abyss. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button or the like button. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We've got the whole shebang and we'd love for you to check it out. We'd love it if you would go ahead and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or whatever streaming app you're listening to us on. It helps us out and we love to see what you guys have to say about us. Also, throughout our episodes, make sure to go to theabysspod.com where we have a bunch of pictures from the episode and we have extra sources if you want to further research the case that we're talking about.
In the case we're discussing today, 4 bodies were found in barrels in a sleepy New Hampshire town, and police would be baffled for decades until new advancements in technology helped blow the case wide open and even connect it to other missing persons cases. This is the case of the Bear Brook Murders.
So let's jump into the Abyss. New Hampshire was an extremely small town. There was only one police officer on duty most of the time. It was one of those places that everyone really knew each other. They had a Bear Brook State Park that covered about half of the town. It was 10,000 acres and kids loved to go play there. In a small town, there can be a limited amount of activities that you can participate in, and so they would go to the park, play hide and seek, use their imaginations, and explore a little bit. One day, there were some kids playing in the Bear Brook State Park, playing hide and seek, and they stumbled upon 2 barrels. They weren't sealed, so the kids decided to peek inside and see what it was, being curious and youthful. They said that it smelt horrendous. The smell was disgusting, and being kids, they kicked the barrel over and they ran away. Left it where it was, decided it was something they didn't want to mess with, and
lucky for them.
Yeah, honestly, because what they find next is absolutely atrocious. A couple months later, on November 10th, 1985, some hunters were out in the state park and they found the spilt over barrels, and they looked at the contents and found that they were 2 bodies, one of a young woman and one of a child. Both of the bodies had been dismembered, wrapped in plastic bags that had been closed with an electrical wire, and then stuffed into this 55-gallon drum and just left beside of a Bear Brook Gardens mobile home park. Both of the bodies were nude and they were already in advanced decomposition. They had also suffered blunt force trauma. Because Allenstown was such a small community, there wasn't a lot of police officers, and they actually had to deputize some of the individuals in the community to secure the crime scenes and help them out to get things done more efficiently. It was determined that the woman had brown, wavy hair and had extreme dental work. Fillings and 3 extractions were seen. The girl was 5 to 11 years old. She had earrings in and a gap in her teeth. She also had symptoms of pneumonia in her lungs. The Allenstown Police Chief Norman Connor didn't have any leads or evidence to determine suspects or what may have really happened to these girls. So the bodies were placed in the morgue for 18 months while they tried to identify them, but no one ended up coming forward. They even created facial reconstructions to try and assist in identifying these individuals, but they were not successful. Eventually, they released the bodies to be put to rest in May 1987. Both of the bodies were put together in a steel casket in case exhumation was required, since technically it's still a cold case, still open. This infuriated the community members. They thought that the case was being closed. They thought the police weren't doing their jobs properly, and the police received a lot of backlash for this. Sergeant John Cody was then assigned to lead the case because there wasn't a cold case unit in New Hampshire at the time, so it was just his responsibility to keep up with it and to find any new evidence if he could.
So fast forward to the year 2000, and Sergeant Cody was sort of taking another look at the case. He was trying to see if he could find any more information on it and decided to reassess the crime scene and see if maybe they missed something, maybe something else was out there. So he went back out to Bear Brook State Park, and about 100 yards from where they found the first 2 barrels, he found another barrel, and this one contained 2 more female bodies. So there was a lot of frustration surrounding this find because both local and state police had missed it in their searches, and like I said, this second barrel was only about 100 yards from where they found the first two bodies. So that brought a little bit more uproar from the public because they thought maybe the police weren't investigating as thoroughly as they should be. Police started thinking that maybe this was a dump site for a serial killer. So after this discovery, they decided to exhume the two other bodies and compare DNA, see if they could find any more evidence. DNA confirmed that the woman and two of the girls were related, but the third little girl was unrelated to any of them. So going off the theory that there may be a serial killer nearby, police started looking into local people. They looked at a trailer park nearby where the bodies were found, but a lot of the residents were ex-convicts, transients. There were over 100 lots, and through the 15 years between these findings, hundreds of people had passed through, and those are just the people that were documented. We don't know about friends, families, couch surfers, things like that. So there were a lot of people to go through, and they were not necessarily the easiest people to find. Because the four bodies were still unidentified, they couldn't really go on who these people were, who they knew, where they were from, anything like that. So they turned to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to sort of help them identify these individuals. They ended up creating facial reconstructions, and if you'd like to take a look at them, head to our website, theabysspod.com, and you can see those pictures along with maps of the areas we're talking about and some other images from the case. Police and forensic scientists really wanted to figure out more about these victims. If they couldn't identify who they were exactly, they wanted to know where they came from, what their life history may have been like. So they used something called isotope analysis, which helped them figure that out. It can help narrow down the range of where they might be from. They can even go so far as to say a certain region of a certain country, and it can analyze things like their diet to try to even narrow down what kind of lifestyle they may have led. So they use this to determine an area of where these victims may have been from. Through this isotope analysis and other forensic science, they determined that all four bodies had been killed in the same time period between 1980 and 1984. They also found that it was very likely that these four people had been together for at least a few months before being murdered. So forensics helped add some pieces to this case, but there were still a lot of gaps left, and it would stay like that for a while. It wasn't until 2017 that police announced that they had a suspect, Bob Evans. He worked as an electrician at a local mill at the time of the murders, and his supervisor actually owned the property where the bodies were dumped. Working at the mill is probably where he got the barrels to begin with, so that also lined up. And in August of 2017, they also determined that Bob Evans was an alias, and that this man's real name was Terrence Peter Rasmussen.
Terrence was born on December 23, 1943 in Denver, Colorado. However, he attended elementary through high school in Phoenix, Arizona. He did drop out of high school in 1960 after his sophomore year. In April 1961, Terrence enlisted in the Navy, but he was discharged after 6 years of service. He ended up moving to Hawaii with his family and met a woman, fell in love, and married her in July 1967. 2 years after getting married, he moved back to Phoenix, Arizona, when his wife gave birth to twin daughters. A year later, they moved to Redwood City, California. They had a son in 1970 and another daughter in 1972. So Terrence was really moving around a lot, exploring the western part of America, traveling to new places with his family. Terrence and his first wife unfortunately separated, and this led him to move back to Phoenix, Arizona. In 1973, Terrence was arrested for aggravated assault. Then it happened again 2 years later in 1975. So he was getting into some nasty behaviors that were getting him in trouble with law enforcement. In December that year, he visited his family with another woman. It has not been identified who that woman was, but his family never saw him again after this visit. I'm not sure if they had a fallout. Maybe he was just busy going around everywhere, a lot going on. But we do know that the divorce had been very nasty. There was a lot of abuse going on, and his family and him probably didn't get along on very good terms because of that.
In interviews, his kids said that when he came back for that visit, he was not really that interested in them. He didn't really want to be around them much or show them any physical affection or anything like that. So he was very distant at that point.
Yeah, a lot of family controversy going on there. And at some point, Terrence ended up moving to Texas, where he worked on an oil rig. Terrence went from job to job a lot. He also went from woman to woman a lot. He ended up getting his first divorce finalized on September 28, 1978. He then began his travels with someone called Elizabeth Evans. He used this name for many years, but he had multiple women in his life. It's believed that many women have gone by the alias Elizabeth Evans. In February 1980, Terrence was arrested in Manchester, New Hampshire, for writing a bad check under the alias Robert T. Evans, also known as Bob Evans. At this time, he had listed an Elizabeth Evans as his wife. 3 months later, he was arrested for theft of electricity services, and he still had Elizabeth Evans listed as his spouse. 5 months after that, he was arrested again, a third time in the year 1980, for diverting electricity current. This time, it was a little bit different, though, because he did not have a spouse listed, so Elizabeth Evans was no longer listed. Terrence started dating another woman named Denise Bowden. She had a 6-month-old daughter, and things were getting pretty serious, even visiting her family for Thanksgiving. However, after visiting Denise's family for Thanksgiving in November 1981, Denise and her 6-month-old daughter went missing, as well as Terrence. Terrence showed up in Los Alamitos, California, under the alias Curtis Kimball. In May 1985, Terrence ended up getting a DUI in Cypress, California, but he was still going by the name Curtis. And 6 months after he got a DUI is when the first set of bodies was found in Bear Brook.
By the summer of 1986, Terrence was living in Santa Cruz, California at an RV park. He was a handyman there, and at this time he was going by the name Gordon Jensen. He had a little girl with him who was about 5 years old that he called Lisa. And Lisa would play with the other little kids in the RV park sometimes, and even got close to a family that would watch her from time to time while Terrence was out at work or running errands. This family noticed that Lisa was very thin. She didn't really have any toys to play with. She seemed like she may be a little bit neglected, and that Terrence was not the best parent. And remember, at this time he was going by the name Gordon, so that's the name they knew him by. Terrence had a big sad story about how his wife had died of cancer when Lisa was just a baby, and how he was struggling to raise her on his own. The neighbors really felt for him. They had really come to care about Lisa and thought maybe they could help him out. They had a daughter who was struggling to conceive. She really wanted to be a mom, and they thought maybe it would be a good fit if Lisa went to live with her. So they came up with a plan to take Lisa to their daughter's house for sort of a trial period of a few weeks to see how everyone adjusted, if they got along. If they did, then they would come back, sign the paperwork, and it would be official. As soon as they left, though, Lisa started acting strange. She had a lot of inappropriate behavior, and she started talking about some awful things that her father had done to her. This family contacted the police, and they took her to a doctor, and it was determined that she had been severely sexually abused, and they even used the word tortured. Of course, they tried to find Terrence, but he was long gone at this point. In September of 1985, police found fingerprints on an audio system that Terrence had installed at the RV park, and they connected this print to Curtis Kimball from his previous arrests. So now they knew Curtis Kimball and Gordon Jensen were the same person. Some police theorized that Lisa had been kidnapped and used as a sex slave, but most people assumed that it was his daughter and he was just abusing her. They collected evidence so a paternity test could be done, but it was never completed. About 3 years later, in November of 1988, Terrence was pulled over for driving a stolen vehicle, and this time he was under the alias Jerry Mockerman. Now that police had him, about 4 months later, he was arrested for child abandonment and sentenced to 3 years in prison. He pled down on charges, and the molestation and child endangerment charges he had were dropped. Terrence was paroled in October of 1990, and he fled the next day and vanished again. It wasn't until 8 years later, Terrence was pulled over under a new name, Larry Vanner, and he was cited for not having insurance. It was 2 years later that the second set of bodies were found in the barrels in Bear Brook State Park. So Terrence went by a lot of names. If you've kept track so far, we have Bob Evans, Curtis Kimball, Gordon Jensen, Larry Vanner, and Jerry Mockerman. So he was keeping up a lot of different lives at this point and doing a fairly good job of keeping them straight until forensics started sort of catching up with him.
Under his new alias, Larry Vanner, Terrence started to see a woman named Unsun June. She was in her 40s and was a chemist at a biotech company. She loved art and traveling. She was a really free spirit and even delved into pottery as one of her many passions. Terrence and Unsun met whenever he was working on her house as a handyman, and they hit it off right at the get-go. Her cousin was throwing a New Year's celebration, a Y2K party, and she was really excited about bringing her new boyfriend. She wanted to show him off, get him to meet her family. It was something she was really proud of. However, it didn't really turn out like she planned. Her cousin was not fond of Terrence because He looked really grungy, and he got really aggressive when talking about his history. He didn't want to be asked questions. He didn't want to discuss anything, and he would just flip on her when she asked something simple as, "Where are you from?" or "What have you done for a living?" Terrence was telling multiple different stories to people at the party. He was changing his career by the second. He was saying he worked for the CIA, and then he told someone he was a retired colonel in the Army, and he told someone else that he was a real estate tycoon. Of course, her cousin seemed a little put off by June's new boyfriend. June was upset that her family didn't support her new boyfriend, and she started to become a little distant. And as Brittany mentioned, this is the perfect setup for domestic abuse, where one individual becomes isolated from the people who love and care and support them. A year later, Terrence, going by Larry Vanner at the moment, moved in with Unsoon. They ended up having an unofficial wedding in her backyard with no legal marriage certificate. Also, Unsoon started to send emails to her family telling them that she wanted nothing to do with them, that she wasn't happy with the way they reacted to her boyfriend, that she really cared about him, and that if they couldn't respect that, then, she didn't want any part of him. In June 2002, Unsoon was planning to go on a trip with one of her friends. She got really busy when she was on the phone with her and said, "Hey, I'll give you a call back later." Little did her friend know that she would never talk to Unsoon again. She never called her, and she never showed up for the trip, and her friend got really concerned, very worried about Unsoon, and asked Terrence about where she is. First, he said that Unsoon was in Virginia, and then he changed his story later, said that, now she's in Oregon. It just really put her friend off. Her friend even offered to come and clean the house for when Unsoon returned. It would be a nice surprise, something kind for her to do, but Terrence refused and said that it wasn't necessary and she didn't need to come by. Rose, who was a loved one of Unsoon, called Terrence saying that she was going to be leaving on a 10-day trip, and if she did not have a call when she returned from Unsoon, rather it be a voicemail, an actual phone call, it didn't matter, that if she had not heard from Unsoon, she was going to contact the police. When she returned and hadn't heard anything, she called the police, and the police brought Terrence in for questioning. We're going to play a little bit of that audio right now when the police were questioning Terrence about Unsoon's disappearance.
But you give me a little bit of leeway for a couple of days until I could get my ducks lined up, or whatever term you prefer to use.
And that's true.
So what I was doing was making arrangements to get my ducks lined up.
Okay.
And now you've got me up here.
Okay.
So here I am. Now, okay, we've been through this road already.
Okay.
Everybody is different.
Right.
Law enforcement people are human beings like everybody else. Like every other individual. Now, I haven't talked any more about Unsoon's problems or my problems because, frankly, you're not my priest.
No.
And you're not my doctor. And both stories have their place. Gossip has its place in society sometimes. But I'm just not going to say any more about Unsoon or myself right now.
Oh,
Because,
with the understanding
frankly, no, I'm not going to cut you off. I'm not going to cut you off. And I've always tried to live by the motto that there's no defense against the truth. But sometimes it's hard to find out what the truth is. You got one side, the other side, and something down the middle that people might perceive to be.
Maybe she hurt herself, and you're concerned about that getting out, that she's harmed herself.
No.
There's no truth.
If you're thinking, is she suicidal?
Yeah.
No, she's not.
She's not.
But she's not as aggressive as she used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And what else can I say? I don't chase younger women. It's just something that happened.
Mm-hmm.
What can I say?
So those were some pieces of his interview. If you want to see the full video, we have a link to it on our website, and you can sort of see his reactions when they catch him in lies and things like that.
And like Brittany mentioned, you can tell from the video when you watch the full thing that he really does rant a lot and goes on talking about random things just to talk, just to throw you off or distract you in some sort of way.
Yeah, he was very calculated, I think, in trying to sort of lead investigators away from what they wanted to talk about. He would go off on tangents about his work and wages and things like that. Talk a lot, but never really say anything.
Exactly.
You can also see in the video that he gets a little bit surprised when they come back and say his fingerprints were run and they had linked him to these other names. One of the investigators thinks that's because the last time he had been in that situation was 10 years ago and things were very slow. There weren't computers involved in the investigations, so it took a few days for fingerprints to come back, and he probably thought he'd give him his fingerprints, look like he cooperated, and then he'd bounce again and disappear. But this time he just didn't have the time to do that because computers made it a much faster process. So once these fingerprints came back, they realized that he was on parole and he had skipped out, so that gave them the opportunity to search his home without a warrant or anything, and things got a lot worse for Terrence when they entered his home. When they started searching the property, they found a dead kitten that had been thrown over the fence. They also found some disturbed soil in the back shed floor, and they dug it up, but they didn't find anything there. They continued searching inside the house, and when they entered the basement, they saw something pretty strange. They saw a huge pile of cat litter. It was about 3 feet tall, and they thought it was probably about 250 pounds of cat litter, so that's quite a bit. When they started digging in this pile of litter, they uncovered a human foot, and this ended up being the dismembered body of Eun Jun. They found blood spatter on the AC unit and found that she had been bludgeoned to death and then cut into pieces. The cat litter had pretty much mummified her, so the remains were pretty preserved. When police talked to neighbors, they found out that Terrence had told them he had a rat problem, so if they smelled anything strange coming from his basement, not to worry about it.
Seems a little off. I don't know why your rats would cause such a strong and foul smell that it would reach all of the neighbors' houses.
Yeah, and I think if someone came to me and told me that, I'd be pretty suspicious.
Yeah, you got some big rats. More like skeletons in the closet.
As they dug further, they even found out that the emails that June had sent her family about not wanting anything to do with them actually were not written by her at all. They were all written by Terrence. In June of 2003, Terrence was arrested for June's murder. He was convicted and sentenced to 15 years to life. As you heard in the audio, they connected him to several of his aliases at this point, so a lot of his lies were unraveling. In August, a DNA test was finally done to see if Terrence was related to Lisa, the child that he had abandoned in 1986. The test found that they were not related, and this sort of sent Lisa, who was now a grown woman, on a journey to find out who she was, who her family was. She did this with the help of genealogy and DNA testing, and eventually found some family members, found out that her name was actually Dawn, and that her mother was named Denise Bowden, who we mentioned earlier as the woman who went missing after visiting her family for Thanksgiving with her 6-month-old daughter. Denise is still missing, and it's assumed that Terrence murdered her. And police don't really know why he kept Lisa alive instead of sort of tying up the loose ends, which he's done many times before, but it may have just been his sort of sick perversions. In 2010, Terrence died of natural causes in prison. He had lung cancer and ultimately died of pneumonia.
In 2016, the San Bernardino law enforcement contacted the New Hampshire police to connect the aliases and crimes to Terrence Rasmussen. This was the first time that they had actually connected Terrence to all of the false identities that he had been going by. Looking back a little bit, when Lisa was trying to figure out who her biological mother was, they ended up testing her DNA with the female from the barrel. It was determined that it wasn't a match, so they were not related. But her being tested to see if they were biologically related influenced them to test the DNA of Terrence against the 4 women as well. In October 2016, this assisted in the identification of the middle child. The DNA was able to confirm that this middle child from the barrel was a biological daughter of Terrence. The child must have been born between 1975 and 1976, and based on the whereabouts of Terrence, it was most likely in California, Texas, or Arizona. The authorities haven't confirmed who the mother is, but they believe that she was probably another victim of Terrence, considering his track record. In 2018, a young woman, Rhonda Randall, who's a social worker and a genealogist and a hobby true crime researcher, had been looking into the Bear Brook Murders case. She listened to a podcast and found some stuff on Ancestry.com from 10 years ago and was able to contact the police to give them her theories on the identification of the young women found. Little did she know that she was becoming a huge asset in the identification of the females in the barrels. Another woman researching the case, who was a true crime fanatic just like us, assisted in finding out their identification as well. She read some new information where they would use autosomal DNA from hair without having the hair root, which was really helpful for this case because they were able to get more than just the mitochondrial DNA. Since it was mitochondrial DNA, they could only see the matrilineal line instead of looking at the paternal line. They couldn't look into who the father really was. Also, some bacteria had infiltrated the bones, which made it really easy to get bacteria DNA, but pretty hard to get human DNA. This new technology using autosomal DNA made them kind of go past it and be able to get the information that they required to further the case. On June 6th, 2019, they successfully identified the 3 related females from the barrels. The adult woman was Marilise Elizabeth Honeychurch, and her 2 biological daughters were the other 2 unidentified girls. Their names were Marie Elizabeth Vaughn and Sarah Lynn McWaters. On November 9th, 2019, a burial was held for the family so that way they could be put to rest near their relatives. Even though they were able to tell that the middle child was biologically related to Terrence, they're not able to identify who that child was. Even to this day, they're still trying to figure it out. If you go on our website, theabysspod.com, you can see the facial reconstructions of this middle child who is unidentified. And if you have any ideas, have any tips, don't hesitate on sending it in. You can call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THE-LOST with any information that you have.
So we wanted to give a little bit of backstory on who Marilise Elizabeth Honeychurch was. She was born on January 28, 1954 in Connecticut. She was one of 5 children, and in 1961 her parents split up. Her mother took the 3 youngest kids to California, while her father kept her and her older sister and stayed in Connecticut. At age 15, Honeychurch moved to California and attended high school in Lakewood, California under her mother's last name, which was Salomon. On June 12, 1971, she married her first husband in Las Vegas, and just 6 months later, she gave birth to Marie Elizabeth Vaughn. She spent some time moving around California and eventually moved back to Connecticut to live with her father. Her husband was in the Navy, and he moved to Falls River, Massachusetts before moving back to Lakewood, California with his daughter. And Marilise did not live with them at this time. She was still living with her father. In February of 1974, Marilise and her husband got divorced, and she was awarded official custody of their daughter. About 7 months after this divorce, Marilise married her second husband. On December 13th of 1977, Sarah Lynn McWaters was born. The following year, Marilise separated from her second husband. Through this separation, Sarah's father was awarded custody, and Marilise still had visitation rights. But when Sarah's father started a new relationship, Sarah was really no longer seen with him. So while we don't have official records, it's presumed that Marilise took full-time custody of Sarah. Also in 1978, Marilise started dating a new guy, and things seemed to be going great. She was really happy, but little did she know she was actually dating a murderer. Her boyfriend's name was Terrence Rasmussen. When Thanksgiving of 1978 came around, Marilise brought her new boyfriend to Thanksgiving, a story that we've heard before. And during this visit, Marilise got into an argument with her mother. It got pretty heated. Terrence and Marilise ended up leaving with the girls, and her family never heard from her again. Marilise and her daughters were likely killed between 1980 and 1984, so there were a couple of years in there that we don't know what happened, if he was keeping them hostage, sort of, or traveling around with them. But we know ultimately they met their fate and ended up in the barrels in Bear Brook State Park. This case carried on for decades because the technology just wasn't there to solve it in the beginning, and I think that's how Terrence got away with a lot. He was obviously very devious, very good at coming up with different lives, and pretty good at keeping a handle on a lot of different aliases. So it was really the technology and forensics that cracked this case open. The DNA technology that was advanced throughout this case was applied to other cases and helped resolve cases like the Golden State Killer. It really had a far-reaching effect. The news conferences that were held for this case also helped generate tips that ended up closing other cases as well. So even though this was such a horrific case, some closure did come out of it for other victims and their families.
Yeah, this case was a wild one. quite the doozy.
Yeah, it really shows how important DNA is, and how even things like genealogy and ancestry, and even things like 23andMe and Ancestry.com, that can help solve a case. That helped a woman figure out who she was. It helps give these victims a name and help generate closure for their family as well. So it's really interesting to see how this man got away for so many years just because the technology was behind him, and when it finally caught up to him, he just didn't last.
Exactly. And nowadays, you know what they say, DNA or it didn't happen.
Yeah, when they didn't have any sociological place to go with this case, when they didn't know who the victims were, who they knew, who suspects close to them might be, it was really the DNA that was the most important thing in this case. If you want more information about this case, there's a podcast called Bear Brook. It goes really deep into each element of this case, and you get to hear from a lot of people. You get to hear from investigators and family members of Terrence and sort of get a different perspective on it. So I highly recommend that you check that out if you want more information. And make sure you go to our website to see images from the case, maps, and pictures of the victims and the crime scene.
Also, if you guys have any other information on this case, there was a lot to it, or if you have any suggestions for future cases, we have a contact us page on our website. Feel free to go on there and shoot us a message. We'd love to hear from you. You can also DM us on Instagram or Facebook, and we'll try to reach back to you as soon as possible. Also, Brittany and I have been thinking about starting a sort of book club with you guys where once a month we would come out with an episode that would just be extra onto the ones we already have. So you wouldn't be losing any new information, and talking about different crime novels, whether it be fiction or nonfiction, and discussing if it was fiction, maybe how it relates to real criminal cases. We were really interested in it. We're excited about it. We have a bunch of ideas, and we would love to know if you're interested as well. If you are, please reach out to us. We want to know so that way we can plan accordingly. And if you have any recommendations on good books or any ideas for what might be fun to do with the book club, please reach out and let us know. We love to hear your input.
Often when we're researching, we find really good books about these cases, and we try to share those with you on our website. And we also wanted to invite you to sign up for an Audible trial membership through the link on our website. And you can find a lot of really good true crime books or crime-based fiction books or whatever you're into on Audible. And I know that's the way that I consume most of the books that I read, because I'm always running around and listening to it in the car and stuff. So it can be a really great way to get some more books in.
However, if you're like me, then you would like your paperbacks and your hardcover books to have that tangible thing in your hands. So you can always go to our Amazon link also and find the books that we'll put up for either our book club or episodes.
So definitely check those out if you're interested, and thanks for jumping into the abyss with us.
And God. Okay, you don't have to stare at me. Want to put me in the circus now, Brittany? Alias. Doing hide and seek like the usual. Like the usual. Let me redo that. Okay.
When people are just like make videos of themselves eating food and then they make millions of dollars.
Signed by Hallie Burrell on the 12th of 4.
People to go through, and they were not necessarily
Gobble gobble, jibble jabble, gobble gobble gobble, wibble wobble. That's what it is. Gobble gobble, wibble wobble. 10 fat turkeys pulling on a fence.
You the one editing this. You just screwing yourself. Hallie. Quote unquote garden came in hot. It's like